the JPanel will actually draw itself in a lot of circumstances, and we don't have to ask for anything special for that to happen. So what is it that triggers the event that we are responding to, and how do we do that responding? So this is interesting stuff, and it's probably the more one of the more curious bits of event-driven programming, because the event is a little more nebulous, right? So that's the interesting thing. So the first thing that we need to do here is, if we are going to draw on this thing, what we're first doing is, I'm probably going to do similar to what we did last time, right? Which is that we're going to extend JFrame, which means we're going to import all of that stuff. So we're going to set up, we're going to go down the road very much like what we did before. And maybe we're going to set the size, and we'll make a size, something that we want to draw on. So I'm going to put in a constructor for this, public draw on, right? And I'm just going to set up some of the stuff that we did before. We're going to set its size, except maybe I'm going to make it bigger. I'm going to make it maybe 400 by 400. And so we can certainly do all that stuff. We can do set title, just like we did before. And I'm going to say graphics on a JPanel. So I'm going to get my JFrame kind of going the way that it did before. And then eventually I'm going to, maybe I do the set default operation, and I'm going to say exit on close, right? And I'm going to set visible equal to true. So I do a lot of that stuff just like I would do before, right? But the difference is here that we want to have a little JPanel to draw on. So again, we may want to host it directly on there. You may want to draw on the whole thing, but also keep in mind that JPanels can be not only a mid-level container, they can also be a widget that sits on top of that mid-level container. So you can have, I'm not saying we're doing it today, but you may decide you want to do something fun like this on your GUI. You can have the JPanel that takes up the whole space, the main, that sort of is glued onto the frame, but within it, you can have a little box that's another JPanel. And that JPanel could in fact host other things, right? Other widgets and other JPanels. But if you want to draw on any of these things, right, you have to go a little bit of a different way. And so the thing that is most interesting for us here is that if we're going to do that, there is a key method that has to be overridden. So if you want to draw on your JPanel, the first thing that you have to do is to subclass it, right? So I'm going to say, this thing is going to be called a, what do we want to call that? I guess JPanel, I don't know, it's a draw panel, but this is kind of a bad name for this class. I'm going to call it a draw panel, right? So if you want to draw on this thing, right, if you're going to want to draw on this thing, you're going to extend a JPanel. You're not going to just instantiate one, because there is a key method that you have to override. Okay, so this is the important thing to know. If you want to draw on a JPanel, you must override this one method. And the name of this method is going to be, right, override. It's going to be public void paint component. Okay. And the interesting thing is, this is going to take a graphics reference, and we're just going to call it G for here, or graphics, or whatever we're going to do. But this is the key thing that if we're going to draw on a JPanel, we need to do, and that is we have to override the paint component. And here's the oddest thing of all. It takes a graphics reference. The other interesting thing here is you will never call this, right? You would never call this thing. Part of the reason is you don't have a graphics reference to pass it, right? So the interesting part, it is going to, whatever it is, the system is going to call this thing at times when it finds it necessary. And we'll talk about how you can hint to the system that maybe you would like it to call this, but you are never supposed to call this thing yourself. Second thing that you're not supposed to do is we are never going to be grabby with the graphics reference like we did with drawing panel with the author's code, right? So if you ever remember with the author's code, we said, hey, drawing panel, please give us your graphics reference, right? Give us your graphics reference. We are not going to do that. So two things, right? If you're writing down notes and you're taking down these warnings, number one, never try to call paint component. Number two, never try to get and grab the graphics reference from anything here, right? Hands off the graphics reference and don't try to call paint component. That's not how this is supposed to work, okay? How it's supposed to work is the system will call paint component when it needs to, and then you're going to write your code that you want to do your drawing with here in this method. Really important thing number three is don't forget to do this. Don't forget to call super.paint component and pass through the graphics reference that you were given, okay? The superclass call is very important here, okay? Why? Because it's not an empty constructor, right? There is a requirement of having a graphics reference. That's number one. Number two, services are being performed for you that you will find very convenient, okay? One of those services that you will find very convenient is that it will clear the panel for you, okay? So number one, don't call paint component. Number two, don't try to physically grab onto the graphics reference. It will pass it to you at the appropriate time. Three, don't forget to call paint component. Number four, then, that means you don't have to forcibly clear this panel when you need to redraw something else. You don't clear it. You don't draw over it. You don't ask it to clear itself. You don't have to do it because it's already done by this superclass paint component call. Okay, so that's 4 important notes for moving through, and when you get to the next project, 4 things that you should remember, right? Any questions about that? Yeah, let me write them down so there's no missing them and I can paste them in the chat, right? So yeah, when drawing on a JPanel, right? Here are the big no-nos, or the big like, if you do this, you're going to get into trouble, maybe here, maybe visibly, or certainly in the long run, if you were trying to do any real applications, these are things that would get you in trouble. So number one, right? Don't call paint component. Now, somewhere down the line before we're done today, we have to talk about some different things about this that'll be helpful, because there are times that even though you can't call paint component, you want to beg the system to call it for you, right? Because you're like, I please need to draw here, right? I know I haven't been called, but I know it's important to draw. So would you please call paint component for me, right? But that's a different thing than you calling paint component, because the system knows how to get the proper graphics reference and trigger this thing and call it and pass. Like, the system will do all the right stuff. So we still need, right? Later, we need the pretty please, right? We need to learn how to do pretty please. Would you call that? Would you would you start this, thing, the ball rolling here, right? So number one, don't call paint component. Number two, don't try to grab the graphics reference. You don't grab the graphics reference. The system will pass it to you at the right moment, and this is the right moment, right? This is the right moment. So don't be grabby with it, right? You will get the graphics reference and you will use it, okay? Number three was call super.paint component, right? It does useful services, right? Don't forget to call that and pass along the graphics reference, right? Pass along the graphics reference that you received when the system called your override of paint component, okay? Number three, or number four, what did I say? What did I say number four was? Somebody who was paying attention?
You don't have to clear it now.
Ah, yes, services, right? Because there are services, right? So that also means you don't have to forcibly clear the panel, right? Clearing is part of the provided service. So you never have to draw over it, ask it to clear itself. Like, you don't have to do any of that stuff, right? It's free. Okay. Seems like there's more, like there's a bunch of don't. Like, it's easy to get drawn into some of these other paths, but there's a bunch of stuff that will lead you toward the dark side, and we just don't want to go down that road. I'm sure there's a number 5 that I was about to think about. Oh, the next thing is, right, something, the next part is here, the sub bullet here for this one is, if helper methods need to draw, you can pass that along, right? So the thing that you need to realize is this needs to be, maybe I just have a second point here. Maybe I have another point. I'll just start it here, right? The point is paint component, right? Your paint component is the starting point for all drawing, right? It's the starting point for all drawing. So if you want to draw, this is your chance to start writing your draw code. If you have helper functions that you want to write, that's fine. But you'll have to pass them the graphics reference if they need to draw, right? If you want to have helpers that draw, you got to pass through that graphics reference. Make sense? But that's okay, right? That's perfectly fine. That's not the same as grabbing it forcibly, right? Like, you were given that thing, so finish what you were doing. Don't store it, right? Don't store the graphics reference. You'll be given it next time when it's time to draw, right? So you just have to realize this is a different world with event-driven programming, right? When the heavens open up and the graphics reference is bestowed on you, then you use it and then you let it go and you're happy to have had it, right? Don't store it. Don't try to force stuff. Okay, the flow is just different here. Okay, make sense? So far, I think that's all the stuff. And then we need to get to the pretty please thing later, right? So we'll have ... and maybe we'll have more stuff, and then maybe we'll come to some other number down here like 9 or whatever. And how do we say pretty please? Say pretty please. Pretty please, it's time to draw. How do we do that? We'll come back to that. Okay, so let's first prove that we can do this, right? Let's see if we can draw at this point something. And if you have knowledge from last quarter, if you did any drawing with the drawing panel, you will know a lot of this stuff. And by the way, in your book, there is a chapter 3G, and that 3G is about graphics. And so if you want some more information about that, you can go read 3G. You just realize that everything it talks about with drawing panel, you throw out, and everything that now, once we're in this context, everything else works the same way. So setting colors and how you draw and the commands that you can have, they all use a graphics reference. So all that stuff works, right? G dot whatever is all going to be the same as you learned before. Okay, it's just this framework and setup that's different than we did before. And hopefully you understand why in 142 this might have been a little bit much, right? Because I can say this stuff to you rapid fire and you can go, yep, makes sense. I see why we extend. I see why we do the super call. Like, you can get all this stuff where 142 people would be a little bit confused already, right? Before we even draw one line. Okay. So let's also make then the one little thing, we need a main, right? So we need to have a main. And so let's just go, I'll just plop in some code here. Maybe I don't need to set visible, that's probably fine. And I called this what? A draw panel, and then this is draw panel. No, I didn't call this a draw panel. I called this a draw on JPanel. This was sort of unfortunate naming today. I'm sorry. Okay. All right. So right now, I think you should expect that if we ran this, we would get a box coming up that would be 400 by 400. It would have this title. It would have the ability to exit on close. We're not going to do the resizable thing because I want to show you some stuff with it. And now, if we do everything right, if we've set it up correctly, we should be able to draw here, right? And that can be using any of the normal stuff that we knew. Again, if you did it in 142, you know that you can do things like G dot set color, color dot blue. Right? Hey, graphics, I want to use the blue paint right now, right? So